Arthur Shawcross, known as the Genesee River Killer, was born on June 6, 1945 in Kittery, Maine, and died in prison on November 10th of 2008. Throughout his life, he was married a total of 4 times and had one son who was named Michael, and he later gave up all parental rights to and never saw again. He was known as the Genesee River Killer for killing 11 women in upstate New York from 1988 to 1990 and disposing of their bodies in the Genesee River Gorge. He also killed 2 children in Watertown, New York. From early on, he had a strained relationship with his family, more so his mother, who was domineering. Shawcross claims that he was molested by his aunt at the age of 9, had sexual relations with his sister, had his first homosexual encounter at the age of 11, and experimented with bestiality there soon after. However, his family denies any of this ever happening, and when talking to various professionals throughout his life, they said he frequently would change his story. When it came to his education, Shawcross failed miserably, often missing classes and bullying other kids. He received the nickname of Oddie due to being socially challenged and withdrawn. At the age of 16, during his freshman year of high school, he dropped out and was suspected of arson and burglary a few years later. He did, however, earn his GED his second time in prison. In 1964, he married his first wife, Sarah Chatterton, who he had his only child with. In 1965, they divorced after he was charged with unlawful entry, and she claims that he was abusive during their short-lived marriage. His second marriage came in 1967 to Linda Neary after receiving his draft papers for the war. From 1967 to 1968, he was in Vietnam, and then he was sent to Fort Still in Oklahoma. He claims that while in Vietnam, he killed 39 people, which the military proved to be wrong, and he claims that he cannibalized Vietnamese children. He was discharged from the military whenever he attempted suicide, and that is when he got his second divorce. Linda also reported him as being abusive and a pyromaniac. In 1969, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson, but only served 22 months. In 1972, he married his third wife, Penny Sherbino, and they divorced shortly after when he confessed to killing 2 children, Jack Blake and Karen Ann Hill. Both of these murders were in Watertown and happened 6 months apart. Both of them had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and dirt and leaves had been shoved down Karen Ann Hill's throat. Since Shawcross gave up the location of Blake's body, he was only charged with manslaughter in the case of Karen. He was given a 25-year sentence, but only served 14 and a half years. Once he got out of prison, he had to move 4 different times due to the public finding out who he was and what he had done. So the courts decided to seal his records, and he moved one last time. This 5th move happened in 1987 with his new soon-to-be wife, Rosemary Wally, and they moved to Rochester, New York. At this time, his life became boring and routine for him. He worked various jobs, began cheating on his wife with Clara Neal, and seeing prostitutes who would more than likely end up dead. Dorothy Blackburn, 27, was a Lyle Avenue prostitute. They agreed to oral sex, but then she bit his penis. He hit her with a blunt object multiple times, bit her several times around the vagina, and then strangled her. Her sister reported her missing, and 6 days later her body was found. This was his first victim. Next came Anna Marie Steffen, 28, who was also a Lyle Avenue prostitute. Her bones were found by a man who was collecting cans. They had to call in an anthropologist to reconstruct her face, and when her father saw the photo of the face, he knew that it was his daughter. Her father identifying her along with dental records proved to be who she was. She was strangled because she got mad since it had been 40 minutes and Shawcross still did not have an erection yet. Dorothy Keller, 59, was the third victim. She was the housekeeper for Shawcross and Rose, and she threatened to tell Rose about their 2-month-long affair. He broke her neck and threw her in the Genesee River Gorge. Patricia, 25, a Lyle Avenue prostitute, was strangled to death and murdered and buried under a pile of leaves because she had seen Shawcross with Steffen. This was when police discovered that they had a serial killer on their hands because they had 4 bodies, 3 of which were Lyle Avenue prostitutes. All had been murdered within 7 months of each other, all had bite marks and strangulation marks, and the times between the murders were getting shorter. Next came June Stott, 30, mentally ill and was not a prostitute. She was reported missing by her boyfriend and was strangled. Marie Welch, 22, strangled, was also a Lyell Avenue prostitute. Frances Brown, 22, was beaten and strangled. 3 days earlier, she had been seen leaving Lyell Avenue with someone who the prostitutes knew as Mike or Mitch. Kimberly Logan, 30, a Lyell Avenue prostitute, was kicked and beaten and had dirt and leaves in her throat, just like Karen Ann Hill. Joanne Van Nostrand was the only prostitute who escaped Shawcross by pulling a knife. She told police that a man named Mitch told her to play dead and then tried to strangle her. On Thanksgiving Day, the body of June Stott was found, having been anally mutilated, cut from the throat to the crotch, and the labia being cut off. Since she was not a prostitute, the police wondered if there were two serial killers on their hands, and they had the FBI do a profile. The FBI profile goes as white male, 30, familiar with the area, knew his victims, sexually dysfunctional due to the lack of semen, would come back and mutilate the bodies if given the chance to do so. The next 4 Lyell Avenue murders follows as Elizabeth Gibson, who was found in a completely different county from the rest, Darlene Trippi, June Cesario, and Felicia Stevens, the final victim, who was killed right at the New Year of 1990. On New Year's Eve, police organized an air search and road patrol on and around the Genesee River Gorge. They found Felicia Stevens' black jeans and boots in separate locations. They then organized another search, like the first, expanding the area. They found the body of June Cesario, and as they went to get a closer look, they saw a man peeing on a bridge above her body. The man fled the scene in his van, and they found him at a nearby nursing home. They brought Shawcross in 2 different times, and he denied at first having anything to do with the murders. Joanne and other prostitutes identified him as Mike or Mitch. They finally got him to admit to it when police told him that they could bring in his wife and Clara together and implicate them in the murders. This was when he gave his first admission, which was that Clara had nothing to do with it. The police gave him a list of 16 different women, and right away he said that he had nothing to do with 5 of them. He listed what each one of them had done to deserve torture and death and blamed the victims since they reminded him of his domineering mother. There was one victim, however, that sparked a softer side to him, and that was June Stott. Apparently, she had been a friend to him and a guest in his home, and he said that the reason he mutilated her was so that her body could decompose faster. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but the jury found him to be sane and guilty. He was sentenced to 250 years in prison and an extra life sentence for the murder of Gibson, who lived in a different county. Some may say that Shawcross could be considered a mission serial killer, but I think that he would be more of a hedonistic lust serial killer. He did not penetrate the victims necessarily, but he did mutilate them. This in its own way has a sexual gratification about it. He could possibly be considered a mission serial killer, however, since he did kill mostly prostitutes and was killing women who reminded him of his mother.